20,000 years ago, you had basically a fraction of 1% were human beings in biomass of mammals and a few pet dogs. And that started to grow in terms of humans compounding from a couple of million to 8+ billion and armored with giant flocks of sheep and herds of cattle and dogs and cats. Do you know what they amount to today? 96% of all mammal life is humans and their pets. And 4% is all the wild animals, all the elephants and deer and rabbits added together are 4%. If we continue to grow, even efficiently, if we continue to grow at this rate, the 4 becomes 2, becomes 1, and we find ourselves engaged in a very interesting experiment. Can we really make it without the insects pulling their weight, without nature doing its thing? We're crushing nature. Plastics in the ocean, plastics in our brains, plastics in the bloodstream, PFASs that are never destroyed by nature are in the water, in the rain, in our systems, in unborn babies. And they cause all manner of ailments, but the one that's most interesting to me is they interfere with fertility. PFASs interfere with fertility. Plastic in the system in general interferes with fertility. I think, above all, pesticides interfere with fertility. Pesticides consumed on fruit and vegetables by pregnant women are, I believe, the most dangerous component that we deal with. Pesticides are designed to kill plants. They're designed to kill insects. They're designed to kill fungus. This is not an accident. You know, plastics interfere with fertility, an unfortunate accident, but they weren't designed to. But pesticides are designed to kill, for heaven's sake. And we slather them on much increased quantities, at least 5 or 6 times more than we did in as recently as 1980. We slather it on the fruit and vegetables, and we recommend that pregnant women eat lots of fruit and vegetables. And we wonder why bad things happen. And the population, for many reasons, is going to bust. And no one, they begin to talk about it. The odd book is written. The odd book doesn't, Empty Planet, perfectly good book, doesn't mention toxicity. And toxicity is a game changer. There are, 50 good reasons, nothing to do with toxicity, where women are deciding not to have children. They're expensive, they're time consuming, very, very difficult to deal with. And the style these days is to do it very intensively, very seriously, takes up your whole life, makes you exhausted, interferes with your career. And women do not get a fair deal. Why would we be surprised that they think they would rather be a full-term participant in the benefits of capitalism? So there are many reasons not to have children. But then in the future, rather than the past, we have toxicity. What does it do? The sperm count in the developed world, since hunter-gatherers, is down about 60%, not 8%, 15%, 60% decline. And according to the experts who look at all the studies ever done, they say that the decline is accelerating. The decline rate in the 21st century is 2.5% a year, and the decline in the last century since World War II was 1.5% a year. So here we are, we're down 60%, we're dropping at 2.5 percentage points from that level every year. And the other day, 20 years ago, a few technical problems with giving birth, but there was not a serious level of problem. And today, the World Health guys are saying that 15% of young couples need help. It's been an enormous increase, and it's all in the last 15 or so years. 20 years from now, it's going to be a third or more of all young couples And if you just look at the statistics, it is going to make it very unlikely that even when you decide to have children, when you've gotten over the 60 reasons not to have them, and then when you try, you find that your ability to have children, your fecundity, is also down. And there is another component that no one talks about, and that is that chemicals are doing a job on our hormones and are interfering with our desire to have sex. Every study you see, every age group, every country, there is less sexual activity. So just think about this. You're not that interested, and there are cultural reasons also to be less interested. And then finally, there are 60 reasons not to have children anyway. And then when you finally get over all those hurdles, your ability has been interfered with by chemicals. This is a fairly disastrous outlook. I will guarantee you, almost 25% of all countries now have a declining population. Every developed country in the world has a declining cohort of babies, except Israel. And India is now below replacement. So we're growing, but we're growing because we have lots of old fogies like me who have to be carried around and have disproportionate share of medical treatment and so on. We're an expensive lot in general, and we are accumulating vast quantities of over 60s, over 80s that we never had before. And we're going to have to pay for it with a much reduced cohort of 20-year-olds and 30. You know, in Japan, who's 20, 30 years ahead of us, the cohort of 18-year-olds is not down 5%, not down 10%, it's down 50% from its peak. 50%. If we were down 50% in America, we would be freaking out. It changes everything. Japan has an amazing social contract, an amazing culture. They can deal with things like this. Do not kid yourself. I joke that my rule 21 in investing is never extrapolate from Japan. They are a completely different, interesting, strange society seen through Western eyes. And they can do things, and they can cope with things that we cannot cope with. Just to give you a very quick example, they were the oldest population in the world, and they went into COVID. COVID age is the worst thing for getting COVID. What happened? The government was incompetent, I thought. They went out of their way to tell the Japanese they did not have to wear masks. They did not have to get a vaccination. Whatever the company told them, they didn't have to do it. What happened? Every Japanese got a vaccination. Every Japanese wore a mask. Every Japanese washed their hands. And at the end of COVID, 5% of the death rate per capita that we had in the US and the UK. 5%. And how is it we didn't know that, by the way? Going back to the stock market and our ability to bamboozle ourselves. We in Massachusetts thought we were doing splendidly. The governor claimed to be doing well. The mayor of Boston claimed to be doing well. If Massachusetts had been a separate country 1 year into COVID, it would have been the worst country in the world. We have a free press. Nobody was aware of it. I would talk at a conference. Nobody had a clue. How is that possible with a free press? And you could go to Johns Hopkins website every morning, as I did, sitting in bed, get the latest data, and we hadn't got a clue. The only good news from a Massachusetts point of view was that the separate countries of New Jersey and New York were even worse. But no other country in the world was as bad as Massachusetts. So we can believe the most incredible nonsense, even with a free press, and even without an infamous battle plan to misguide us. I think the press was perfectly well-intentioned, doing its thing, and yet conveyed a hopelessly inaccurate impression of where the U.S. stood in terms of real life.
So you've stated that a large percentage of your wealth is invested in early stage venture capital, things like presumably green energy, climate change. And one of your previous comments that stuck out to me was that capitalism has produced amazing things for society, but it can't spell, or it can't even begin to spell altruism. And to help accelerate the transition, you've advocated for things like a carbon tax to encourage the use of alternative energy sources. So, in light of what you've seen sort of in this venture arena, do you foresee just more intervention outside from like government forces is going to be needed, or are you seeing seeing a lot of hope in terms of innovation and human ingenuity and whatnot?
Yeah, I see a lot of hope in terms of ingenuity. We're a pretty dopey species and very inept at thinking about long-term problems. But my God, we're inventive. And if you go back 20 years, I think every honest climate change person would have to admit that the progress in wind, the progress in solar, the progress in storage, particularly, jeepers creepers, that'll soon be down to 5% of the cost of 20 years ago. Far, far more profound progress than anyone ever guessed. Electric vehicles. Plug-in vehicles in China today approach 50% of total. They're ingenious, they're dripping in functions, and they make 90% of the electric buses in the world, and they have over 90% now of their buses are electric. No, the progress has been sensational and far broader than I mentioned. The damage has been sensational as well. We phrase this as the race of our lives because both sides are racing. I mean, we produced more in the last 3 years, more increments of particles of CO2, which are outrageously effective at trapping heat. We produced more in the last 3 years than any 3 years in American history. We have not even started to tip the increase of CO2 yet. I think we will. I think in 20 years from now, the annual output will be down. I think China, Europe, and the US will all peak and be declining. The problem is, and why it's a race, is we don't have a lot of time. We're doing so much damage. And you can see it. Anyone who doesn't suffer from a strong belief of political principles that gets in the way of looking at data can see that the weather is going to hell, right? We have far more floods, which was predictable at least 30, 40 years ago. Hotter air will carry and carries 5% more water vapor than it used to. So you will get more serious downpours, and we are seeing it everywhere. But the temperature is going up, so it will dry out the countryside quicker, and you will have more droughts, and you will have more forest fires. And if you look at the billion-dollar accident, it's a chart that goes from low on the left of the chart to way high on the right of the chart. Steady, dramatic increases in billion-dollar plus weather accidents. And in a real sense, they're not accidents. They're part of the deal that we have going on here. You create particles of CO2, methane, and nitrous oxide, you trap the heat. And we're trapping it at the rate of an old Hiroshima nuclear bomb every few seconds. That is the incremental heat trapped equivalent every few seconds. I mean, it is absolutely shocking. And you think of all the energy you get from burning fossil fuels. That isn't the energy that gets trapped. Because of the fact that the process is quite different, it generates CO2 by horrible accident. CO2 is an incredible heat trapper. If it wasn't, by the way, we'd be living on a frozen planet